morning to Alasdair Day. Thank you so much for joining us on this podcast and being one of our guests. It's a delight to have you here, Alasdair. I think this is an easy question I'm going to start you with. I'm just ease you into the process. Tell us a little bit about who you are and what is it exactly that you do at Isle of Raasay.
Well, good morning. Thank you very much for inviting me. So, yeah, I'm Alasdair B, co-founder and Master Distiller at Revitalising, and we have the distillery on the Isle of Raasay.
Oh, brilliant. And you are, Isle of Raasay is potentially a place that many people around the globe might not know about it. It's in Scotland. I think they might have got a hint from your accent. It is on the Hebridean coast. And it is from its history. It's got a lot of distillation and distillery in its heritage, would you say? But perhaps, which I thought was quite interesting, perhaps not legally.
Yes,
Can you tell us a bit more about that?
So yes, there's been a lot of distilling on Raasay over the years. In the past, not necessarily with a license to do so. So that's why we always say that we're the first legal distillery on the Isle of Raasay. And you're quite right, Raasay's not a well-known island. We're off the east coast of Skye, so the Isle of Skye is a much better known island in the northwest of Scotland. Raasay is, said, quite small. It's 14 miles long, 3 miles wide, which makes it about the same size and similar shape to Manhattan. However, the last census, there was 161 people who lived on Raasay.
Okay.
So
there's quite a few more in Manhattan, I think.
Yeah, there is. We've got a few sheep, but even the sheep don't amount up to the amount of people who live in Manhattan. I also would say that the population on Raasay now is closer to 200. We are fortunate enough to employ 40 people at the distillery on Raasay. They all live on Raasay. And that's because we're not just a distillery. We obviously have the distillery, but we do everything on Raasay. So we have our own well that the water comes from, and we do the distilling, but we do all of the maturation on Raasay, and we do the bottling on Raasay as well. And as well as tours, we have a bar, a restaurant, and accommodation. We have 6 en-suite rooms where you can actually stay with us in the distillery on Raasay.
That's right, and you actually got highlighted as a tourist destination. Was it a year or two ago?
Yeah. So in 2022, we won 2 awards, but one of those awards was Scottish Tourism Destination of the Year. So obviously delighted with that.
I think that is Sorry, carry on, Alasdair.
No, I was just saying it's the second award was the Scottish Distillery of the Year. So,
well, round of applause.
Awards. Yeah, exactly. So, but yes, so, delighted to have that award. But we are an experience, we are a destination, and we do want people to come and see us. And we're just a 25-minute ferry from Skye.
That's amazing. Well, with the better weather coming soon, albeit it's always dubious in Scotland, I think that's quite a good plan, really, to come see you. And I think it is interesting how distilleries, particularly up in the Hebrides, but not, we see it a lot in the US as well. It's become almost an experience, and that extension to the brand is a really interesting dynamic that seems to be strengthening, if not just carrying on. And I think the Hebridean Trail is potentially something that you'll join if you don't already join, for those people who really enjoy.
We were part of setting up the Hebridean Whisky Trail, so ourselves, Torreg, Alasdair, Isle of Raasay, and Nigeria are all part of the Hebridean Trail. And as you say, it's about being able to bring people to the area, and for people who do come to the area to have lots of different experience, lots of different things to do. And it's a big part of Raasay. It's about the place, the community, the people, and when people come and stay with us, not only do you meet the team, but they meet the community on Raasay as well, and experience what it is like to be on an island, off an island in the Hebrides.
Absolutely. And I think that really does come through that other theme of the celebration of your provenance comes through in the brand, and it's not necessarily just in, as you said, you distill, you bottle, you mature the liquid on the island, and then that's a celebration of what the island and its produce can bring. But it's about the people as well. So I mean, it's expanded to 200 people. You are employing about 400 for 40, and that's a really important part. That it's important to your distillery, isn't it, that you create those jobs?
It is, yes. And, when we first started, people came back to the island to work at the distillery. So there were people who moved away to go to university and had found other jobs and were able to come back and live and work on the island. And we like to think that it's not just a job, it's a career. And so people have moved back. We now have people who have specifically moved to live on Raasay to work at the distillery.
Fantastic. And I guess that's still very much a background trend, isn't it, with island living, but that urbanization of a lot of the younger generations moving across to find opportunities. So it's almost about attracting them back, and attracting them back in a robust career.
Yes.
And it's certainly not disappearing. I mean, Scotch whiskey has to be grown in Scotland, has to be made in Scotland. So it's homegrown, and I think it's definitely a celebration of that. I think the provenance is an interesting one in this industry. I mean, I know Signet come from a packaging and a sort of a brand communication approach with things, but we listen a lot to our different clients, and there is this a debate around provenance and how potentially there's a marketing sway for some brands out there that are maybe more heavily geographically named or branded, but actually the small print is they're not really actually from the location that they're pushing out there. What's your take on that? Or is that something that you've come across, that debate?
Yeah, I think what I would say is that we try to be completely transparent. We are very much about Raasay, doing everything on Raasay, working with the community, helping to build the community. So it's not just the people that work at the distillery. It's creating other businesses, it's working with our neighbours at Raasay House to make sure that, everybody thrives and everything improves. That's ultimately part of the goal of what we're doing at the distillery. It's a very, very long-term business. And I think that's the approach we take. And it's saying, like, everything we do on the island, so nothing leaves the island until it's in a bottle and sold, and then it goes to 40 different markets around the world. And that's a big part of it. And I think we have to do that. We have to be transparent and honest. And I don't think in my view, I don't think it happens so much now, but there has been elements in the past where a name is used and the name implies a place. And then it turns out that it's just a brand name and not a place. So I think the place where we make the whiskey and, on Raasay, hopefully in time, the environment will shape the maturation, as well as the people and the community. The people that work at the distillery clearly influence the spirit that we make, and I think that's a huge part of what we do. So I think provenance is important, and it's our job then to translate that meaningfully to consumers around the world. That's a job that is a very difficult job to do. It's absolutely.
And I think that's it. We talk a lot about in the brand world, and as a marketer, I've got a vested interest in this, but we talk about how your story differentiates, but where you come from is also so unique that it needs to be pulled through and communicated in different ways. You can tell them about it, but it's also how do they experience it. And I think from what we'll be talking about is how that translates into your bottle, and design is an epic story in itself. But before we go on to that, obviously you mentioned, Alasdair, you are a co-founder, and you founded the business with Bill Dobby.
Correct.
Can you tell us about how you met, and when did R&B distillers just become a good idea at one point? Like, I'm always interested. And every time I've asked this question, it's, we were sitting on a porch, we were in a late night bar. It's always an interesting question about how you have that eureka moment.
Yeah, so I think the honest answer is it starts with two separate people. It starts with Bill and myself, and two separate places. So my connection with whiskey, I can trace back to 1820. My great-grandfather was a whiskey blender in Coldstream in the Scottish borders, so the complete opposite corner of Scotland from Raasay. And so I grew up with that, always knowing that I had this connection to whiskey, but the business is long gone. My great-grandfather retired after the war, that was in business. But in 2009, I was thinking about, I worked in the food industry, so I did a degree in botany at Glasgow University, which took me into the food industry. Worked in the food industry for over 35 years. I was thinking, how can I do something for myself? So I did the usual things, shortbread business, haggis, was that what I want to do? And then, of course, my dad said to me, what about the book? And the family talk about the Cellar book. So this was my great-grandfather's book. It was a sales ledger for 1821, 1822, but at the back of the book, it's got all the blends that the company made between 1899 and 1916. So I thought that's a great idea. So I decided to recreate one of my great-grandfather's blends. It was called the Tritium. So that's how I started in whiskey. I started by recreating a blended Scotch whiskey from the past, from my heritage. And then after a few years of doing that, it was around the time, similar to now, it's very difficult to buy mature whiskey in casks. And that's what I was doing in blending. So I thought, actually, if this is going to be a long-term business, I'm going to need an investment to buy new fillings and to fund that maturing. And when I did the sums, I thought, actually you could build a small distillery for that amount of money. And then, that was the light bulb moment for me. So I then wrote a business plan to build a small distillery in the borders, because that was my family connection, that's my heritage. But then I had to find the investment to be able to do that. And kind of a very long story short, that's how I met Bill, because Bill had decided he worked Bill is a serial entrepreneur working in tech businesses. He's built businesses up, sold them on, done that several times, and was looking for a longer term business, a legacy business for his family. And I was lucky enough to meet Bill, and the first meeting, obviously, I had my bottle of Tweedial and book and explained all of this. And Bill said, well, actually, I was thinking of Raasay. I bought a disused hotel on Isle of Raasay. So, okay, that's interesting. Anyway, jumping ahead, in May 2014, Bill and I went up to Raasay together, and we stood outside Bordale House, which Bill had bought, and he said, what do you think? Could this be a distillery? And I was looking at the view across the sky and thinking, you know what, this is the place to build a distillery. So then that's how R&B Distillers came about, and it was incorporated in July 2014, so we're coming up to our 10th anniversary this year. And we formed R&B Distillers specifically to build the distillery on Isle of Raasay, and we got our planning permission in February 2016. We broke ground in June 2016, and we started distilling in September 2017. We sold our very first single malt, we released that in November 2020. So we're very young, very new distillery, but that's the background. So it is a family business. See, Bill and I co-founded it, but Bill's son William is now our managing director. it's very much a family business, but a family business with a long-term game.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're bringing your side of the family in there through the learnings from back in the pre-war, from great grandfathers,
Yeah,
because that will
that's
still be informing your decision making to the state. So I think it's
absolutely.
like a combination of the two that's quite romantic in that site. But you say 10 years, you now have the Isle of Raasay. You've
Mhm.
got a single malt. You released that first, and now you have the Isle of Raasay gin. You also
Yeah,
have multiple different cast releases that you've worked, and of course the tourism destination of the year. You celebrated that with also an expression and a release.
yeah.
I mean, there are some. You might be new, but you've been busy. Would you say?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, um, yeah, just on your point, my heritage and the blending background. I mean, I was fortunate enough to have a blank sheet of paper when we were building Ramsey, and very much approached it from that blending background.
Mm.
And so we can produce different styles of new mixed spirit at the distillery. So we do peated and unpeated, for example. We do 6 months of each and mature them separately. And then we have 3 different cask types. So we use XY casks, drinking and oak casks, next bottle red wine. So we talk about the Nicaea, which is Gaelic for the 6. The 6th cask, we have a recipe. So we are a single malt, but we have 6 different parts to that we then, after it's matured, back together. And the rationale behind that was when you're blending whiskey, you need complexity, depth, and balance. And that's what we're looking for. So our signature single malt is made up of those 6 different components, all matured separately and then vatted back together. Now that then allows us to do individual releases, so we can then deconstruct the single malt, if you like, and do both of those 6 component parts.
Wow. Well, that's an achievement in itself, isn't it? So, I mean, that's quite a mighty feat that you've managed there. And the flavor palette. Did
Yeah.
you have and of course, wherever you go across the lowlands, the highlands, there's different flavor chemistries. There's different expectations for what you come across. And even when I was living up in Scotland, I remember getting told that they're entry level whiskies, which we would recommend for you, Leanne. And then there's the big contenders when you've been in this, when you've trained your palate, etc., for 10, 20 years. So when you were building Isle of Raasay's, flagship single malt, and you were building those flavor compositions based on the different 6 casks, did you have a customer in mind? Did you have a picture of who would be your target audience when you were building this whiskey?
Yeah, I mean, basically, again, going back to place and that whole thing about having a blank sheet of paper. So there hadn't been a legal distillery on Raasay before, so we kind of, it was open to us the style of whiskey that we could make. It wasn't like it had to be a Raasay whiskey. It's just it's more the question, what is the Isle of Raasay single malt going to be? So we started with where we are, in the Hebrides. So we're a Hebridean single malt. And then the question was, well, what is a Hebridean single malt? So we looked at other distilleries at the time. So there was Alasdair, Jura, Tobermory, and the thing there was all kind of lightly peated. So Islay is renowned, well known for big, heavy, light peated whiskies. But we thought, well, we are more like these other Hebridean whiskies. So that was the first step. The first step was lightly peated. But then how do you make lightly peated? And so you could bring the barley in at, say, 21 parts per million, which is fairly lightly peated, and the maltster would blend that to get that parts per million. But what I wanted to do, and go back to this complexity and depth element, was to do the 6 months of unpeated and the 6 months of heavily peated that we brought back together to make lightly peated. So that's what we do. And to me, that gives us more complexity by having 2 separate elements. It also gives us more flexibility because we can have lightly peated, unpeated, or heavily peated. So it gives us more range. But then the next bit was probably slightly harder. It was like, okay, it's lightly peated, but what is that? What's that predominant flavour? And again, at the time, looking at other whiskies, and it's probably similar today, is that when you talk about fruit in whiskey, it's usually apples, pears, might be banana, it might be tropical fruit. And I was thinking, well, how do we have something, how do we have that fruit character that's maybe slightly different? And that took me to what a lot of people were talking about, some of the old Bowmore whiskies on Ireland that had this very predominant dark fruit flavour. And then it disappeared, and that's what people were talking about, this dark fruit, and it disappeared. And then they worked really hard and they brought this dark fruit flavour back. So it's like, well, how about we're, in simple terms, simplistic terms, we're lightly peated with dark fruit. And that's what started. And we made that decision and came to that conclusion before we could even design the process or the wood policy, which was great. And this is the benefit of a blank sheet of paper is we're going to produce a lightly peated single malt with dark fruit flavours. And then we were able to design a process and an oak policy that allows us to make that whiskey.
I must say, this is why it's so beneficial to actually be videoing this podcast as well as it just being an audio, because I can see you just light up on that side of the camera as soon as we start talking about this whole process. And this is, a few years later, so I can't imagine what you were like back when you started with that fresh piece of paper. The energy must have been beyond. But it's certainly something that's quite contagious and coming through this camera. So all listeners should be subscribing to our YouTube just to see that face. But I think that's interesting because it being lightly peated, and offering that sort of complexity and that diversity, it lends itself to a sort of a wider interest. And not that this becomes gendered or anything, but there is perhaps a resounding idea that women don't access whiskey as drinkers as much because, one, it's very complicated, but two, they feel like it's that very peaty, smoky, heavy duty whiskies, and perhaps Isle of Raasay allows itself to be more accessible to a wider market.
No, absolutely. I mean, that was one of the other things when we were you have to make that decision in the style of whiskey you're going to make. And I used the word elegant when we first started out. Of course, then everybody went, well, Alasdair, what does elegant mean? And so, and when you think about it, actually, but it's approachable. It's approachable. It's something that is easy to drink. That's the right
word.
It's something that's easy to drink. It's, for me, it was something that's like, I wanted to make something that people could enjoy. It's something you didn't have to work at. We all know that whiskey is an acquired taste anyway. So you've got to get over that step. You've got to work hard to acquire a taste to enjoy whiskey. And I think that's what puts people off. Whatever local life, that puts people off. It's like because it's a hurdle you have to step over. And so I thought, well, I would, let's make something that is approachable, enjoyable, fun, even, beautiful. Yeah. These are all things that we wanted to do.
I think that's important because I think that the reputation of whiskey is also changing. It's a drink of status, but we now have a customer base and an emerging Gen Z generation that are, I think, curious by nature. So this whole status quo of whiskey being something of the older gentlemen's drinkers, I think that's just out the window. And there are a lot more people that are curious about accessing this whole world of spirit and finding what works for them, because there will be something. And not that it's the same, it's a terrible analogy, but I knew that I wanted to be into olives when I was younger. I hated them. You train your palate almost to just find something that really works. And now I'm just an olive lover. But that's a side anecdote that's probably not useful for this.
I think that's very true. I think but we should make that journey easier for people as well, and enjoyable and fun. So I think that's a big part of it. And so my elegant turned out to be approachable. There you go.
Yeah, yeah, and you've made that a really nice segue. Actually, is how do we make it easy for people to
Then,
access this world and to understand? Um, and you've put a lot of work into the taste, the flavor chemistry. That can easily be dismissed or overlooked if you don't get the packaging and the bottle
yeah,
right. So you've created this powerful liquid. Now, how do you house it and make that something that people want to purchase? It's a whole new area of expertise. So having been a contributor to that process, what approach, what considerations did you feel like you had to make when you were going, right, what do we want this bottle to look like? These are our absolute must haves.
yeah. I mean, we're a new distillery, and we're a new distillery at a time where whiskey, Scotch whiskey, world whiskey is booming, and
Mm.
there are a lot of new distilleries. So we're acutely aware that we had to stand out, because the challenge you have is that if you on a shelf with all these, new whiskey, but also these huge brand names within the industry, how do you stand out? So that we knew that, that was the elephant in the room that we had to accept. It's like we have to be able to stand out. But then you have to have relevance. So you need to stand out, but you
Yes.
need to stand out, with a reason. Why does the bottle look like that? Yes, it stands out. We've got that. Why does it look like that? And we worked very closely with the designers. We had the designers up on Raasay for 3 days, and we drove them round, and we explained everything and talked about the blank sheet of paper, and came down to talking about it. We found ourselves talking about the geology of the island. And Raasay is a very complex geology. There's a lot of volcanic rock, but there's also, where the distillery is, this Jurassic sandstone. And our well goes 60 metres down below the distillery to bring the water back up. And that's Jurassic sandstone. But everything around it is volcanic rock. So you've got granite and basalt. And the thing about volcanic rock is that it's impervious. The water doesn't go into the rock. It runs over the rock. And as it's doing that, it collects all these minerals from the volcanic rock, and then it all ends up in this big sponge underneath the distillery. So we're talking about all of this, and then I was saying, well, we use the water for everything. So we use it for mashing, we use it for fermentation, we use it for cooling and condensing the liquid, we use it for cask reduction, we use it for bottling. And that's really where it started to inform the design. So, when you look at our bottle, hopefully you see that we've actually taken modelling clay and pushed it into the rocks to get the texture, and then used that to make the mould for the bottle. But then on the east side of Raasay, there's in the sandstone and Jurassic world, there's fossils. And so we use those fossils and push them into the modelling clay as well. So that when you look at the bottle, not only do you see the texture of the actual rocks on the island, but you see the fossils as well. And that allows us to then talk about the geology and how the geology affects the water, and also how the water affects the whiskey. Now, we all know that the process of distilling is actually to remove water and concentrate the alcohol. But the fact that we fill the casks on Raasay and we use the same water from the well to reduce the alcohol down to the cask strength, and then we use the water after maturation, bottling, what we distill out, some of that we're adding back in. So that's where the bottle design came from. And again, hopefully people look at the bottle and go, why does it look like that? But then we can explain, and it's all about the place that makes the bottle and the liquid.
Yeah, absolutely. And you shared that and in a recent interview where you say that the three sort of elements of your design process were exactly that: a sense of place,
Mm-hmm.
the dramatic landscape, and the fact that this island is a modern island with a distillery that is is something to be reckoned with, if you will, not to be underestimated. And I think that's pretty. I think you've absolutely achieved that. But to break that down and to further, for those who haven't actually seen the bottle, please do Google it right now. But I think you've only touched the surface. That the cask of that glass bottle does have these embedded fossils, sort of imprints into this custom-made glass. But the bottle itself feels like a very high-end luxury decanter. So it sits pride of place on those shelves. And
Yeah.
so I think it's almost starting to think about that post-purchase journey of, once someone has this in their possession, it's going to be sitting proud on a shelf, and people are going to ask those questions as well. What I also found really interesting was what you engraved not engraved, but what you embossed at the bottom of it, which I think was a nice nod back to again a celebration of place. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so as you see, it's that decanter-like bottle, and it's got Isle of Raasay, and obviously the way the text is as well, is part of when you hold the bottle and you're pouring it, and then everything's the right way around as you're actually pouring the whiskey. So that was a good part of it. But yes, to have the Gaelic on the Isle of Raasay in Gaelic on the base of the bottle was, again, as you say, a nod to where we are, but also I think the other thing that's important as well is that, it takes a long time to drink a bottle of whiskey, and it sits there, and we wanted things that would not necessarily be what you saw when you picked it off the shelf, but as you were drinking and you pick the bottle up and you look at it, lots of little discoveries, lots of things that, you've poured yourself an Isle of Raasay single malt, and then put the bottle down, you're looking at it, it's that, and you look at it and you find just other little elements of things. And it's the same on the label, the population of the island is on the label, the schematic of the geology is on the label, and it was all just, it is that thing. And the other thing from our point of view as well is if people then keep that bottle, and it reminds them of Raasay, and then they will talk to other people about it. And that's so important. That third-party verification, other consumers saying, have you seen that, have you tried that as well? And it takes time, and it's a long time for that message, particularly when you're exporting to all these different countries around the world. But that's really part of the design process, was how do we have this lingering message and this things that you find as you're enjoying the whiskey.
I think you've articulated that so well. In fact, we talked about this quite recently on our website about what we called like the onion method, where you're slowly, you see it face value and you appreciate for what it is, but slowly every time you appreciate it, you're taking off layers and appreciating sub layers of storytelling. And I think almost for those loyal customers of yours, it becomes almost like an inside, like, did you see that? You might have missed it the first time, but go check. And it becomes this sense of belonging that I think is really resonating. And I think you talk about, I'd like to talk about that a little later, because we talk about your journey so far and your growth ambitions, and customer loyalty being a really strong component of that success. So I really do want to touch on that. But before I do, the Gaelic that's okay, my pronunciation is terrible. Say that again, Alasdair.
Gaelic. The Gaelic that's
Gaelic. The Gaelic. Right. So I've been practicing this, but underneath is Gaelic for water of life, which is Ushka Beha.
Yep.
Is that right?
That's it.
Yes. Can I just ask though, how much of that was a culmination of you and Bill and the wider team to create and build together, or how much did you feel like actually we need to get some external help with this?
Yeah, well, it was crucial that the whole team on Raasay was involved, because that's, as I said already, it's about the place and the people. That's absolutely it. So when we did work with the design team, they came to Raasay, they met the team, they spoke to everybody into it. We had when they drove around the island, I didn't take them round, it was part, like everyone was involved at different points so that we could try and get, everyone's input into that. But then I think the benefit of working with designers is then they take that and they bring it down into something. And when we were then going through the process and looking at different versions of design, it was very clear that they had listened to everyone and they had taken on board, but then they had, very beautifully put that all together into something that we all thought, that's it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're right. It's something like there's a lot of talent in our design agencies, and we work very closely with so many of them in the UK and in the US. And I think being able to bring your vision to someone that can create that into reality, if you will, and make that actually feasible to then produce en masse is a whole different thing. But I think you've executed it so brilliantly, and it's so nice to know how the team came together to build that story. So you now have some very successful and beautiful whiskey we've talked a lot about, but you also have the Isle of Raasay gin. I think you mentioned earlier you've had a change of management now. The Bill side of the family has taken on more of a chairman role, and there's some movement here. But you have experienced some strong success to date. I think you said or reported that you've had 5 million in revenue in 2023, even though, and we all know it industry, it was quite a hard time for high-end whiskey in 2023, maybe a little bit before. What's your take on that and how you navigated it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true. I think particularly the latter half of 2023 was very difficult, predominantly with exports, and I think most companies are trying the same thing. Again, going back to that whole thing, it's I think we just recognise that there are a lot of players in the industry, and you have to work hard, and you can't ever sit back, and you just got to continually go at that. And I think that's what we try to do. We try to, excuse me, look at what we've done, review that, look what we've done well, maybe what we've done not so well, and try and build on that all the time. And it's just a lot of continuous hard work by the whole of the team. And our sales team in 2022 as well pretty much travelled the world telling the story. And I think that's the other thing. It's one thing to send whiskey off Raasay around the world, but it's another thing to draw through those sales. It's a continuous thing. It's not really sold when it leaves Raasay. It's really sold when someone picks it off a shelf in San Francisco or Tokyo, or that's when it's actually sold.
And speaking of which, you also shared that, I mean, you've got ambitious plans over the next 10 years. You've hit the 10-year mark here, and you're hoping to maybe 5 times that scale by 2033. And you were saying that actually a lot of the markets are perhaps North America and Asia for you. How do you think you have built a lot of customer loyalty over the last few years, and that's delivering? How do you think that might change, or what tactics do you think you might have to employ now trying to access North America and Asia, which are very strong, but 2 very different markets?
Yeah, very different markets, and I think that's really important. And I think we've got to not only listen to our importers and our distributors, but we've got to listen to our customers and what is it that they want. And that varies greatly around the world. It varies from state to state, and in the US as well. So I think we're conscious of that. Having said that, we have Isle of Raasay signature single malt, and that is what we're all about. That is Isle of Raasay, and I think that's really important. In terms of the growth plans, there are a number of different elements of that. So we're looking at expanding our accommodation in Raasay, because that's been crucial to the experience. So people come and experience Raasay, and then they go away and hopefully tell everyone about their experience on Raasay. But it makes it real. Again, it's anecdotal, but a lot of people say, yeah, we've seen the photographs of the view of Skye, it looks amazing, but once you're actually here and you're in the distillery and you're having dinner in the restaurant, you're drinking a jam and you look at the view, it is a completely different thing to experience that. So I think that's a very important part of it. I think longer term, probably expanding the production capacity of Raasay as well is an important thing. But then we're also looking at building a second distillery at Machrihanish and Campbelltown. And part of that is exactly as you mentioned, it is what is it that people want to drink. So Isle of Raasay has lightly peated single malt with dark fruits, but Machrihanish unpeated, probably slightly mature, a different thing, a different element. So it has to complement Isle of Raasay, but it also gives us something that's different. And if we're going to grow in different markets, then I think we need to have that ability to, as we said earlier, approachable whiskey that people enjoy and playing to what it is that people want to drink.
Absolutely. And I think it does always help that Scotland has, it is well known it has that sort of prestige across the world. So there isn't a lot of effort that's needed to lure someone to say experience it, but experience it in the world that we've created on the Isle of Raasay. So, and as an unintended consequence, you're also improving that sort of economy on the island, which I think is a nice circular model.
Absolutely.
Looking back over the last decade, how do you think you've done so far?
Well, that's something. It's something that you rarely really get to do. Is like stop and look back. But no, I think we're pleased with and proud of what we've done so far. But we're just constantly acknowledging that there's so much more to do, and that you can't. It'd be nice just to look back and go, "Way, But I think
it's not life, is it?
We're realists, so you're always looking forward. I think and it's very important. But we do celebrate success at the same time. We do take time with the team a couple of times a year to celebrate success, and I think that's important.
Yeah, that's fab. Yeah, 100%. Especially as you grow, keeping that close-knit culture that I'm getting from you is so important, because that's at the essence of everything that you're doing at the distillery. Any lessons you'll be taking forward with you if we're moving forward, future thinking? Any lessons that you've learned from?
Yeah, absolutely.
That others can also learn from.
Yeah, I think that's an important part. See, just that review and what could we do better. So certainly looking at Machrihanish, we're very much looking at how sustainable we can make that distillery, and what we learned this time in the process design from Machrihanish was setting them then back to what we're doing on Raasay as well. So it's amazing how things have changed in that 10 years. 10 years as we started planning Raasay, how much has changed, and for the good. Just how much the technology has changed, and how the actual equipment we're looking at putting in Machrihanish, just what's available now, it wasn't available then. It's amazing. And at the same time, looking forward and going, oh, look at this. This technology is coming. This is progressing. So how do you try and build some future proofing into that as well? I think that's a big learning of hopefully what we're going to do at Machrihanish, and then bringing that into the wine. So I think that's a huge part of what we're doing. Looking forward, and again, new markets, and how do you open new markets for Isle of Raasay and Machrihanish in the future without losing the focus on what you've already done? Because
I agree,
we have to build on what we're doing, but then everything then grows, and you can't afford to drop a spinning plate, and you gotta be mindful of all of that. So that's another lesson as well, is that we can't lose focus on, if we're good at something, we can't lose focus on that and progressing that.
Yeah, that sort of mission drift of prioritizing something different. Always remember what we're at the core. And I think as you grow, it will be the challenge of how you bring that expansion into your world as opposed to you making yourself more applicable for that expansion, if that makes sense. And that will be a really interesting interesting maneuver that we can't wait. And potentially we would like to meet up again once in a couple of years, see how things are going. I think it would be absolutely imperative that we do a check-in, and how many more awards you'll have won, which is absolutely going to happen. On that note, before we close, if you were to describe, Alasdair, the Isle of Raasay in one word or phrase, and the distillery, as opposed to the entire community, what would it be?
The one word.
The one word or phrase. I'm flexible.
Well, if it was a word, it would be contemporary. And I think that's really important. Yeah. And in a phrase, that's probably, it's probably harder. But I think it is, I guess, contemporary, but we still have to be visionary. So visionary spirit in a contemporary world.
I definitely agree with that. I get that from our conversation today. And as we close this interview, I simply just want to say thank you and Bill and your great-grandfather and his son and all the work and the thinking that has gone into creating this new distillery that is setting its name and creating a reputation that is turning heads. So we love the bottle. We think that it definitely reflects the provenance of the island, and just thank you for what you're doing. I'm really grateful for you agreeing to be on this interview and to sharing things so candidly and contagiously, I think. So if I was to describe you, Alasdair, in one word, it would be contagious. That would be it. But in a positive way, not a negative one.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you very much for the opportunity. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Brilliant.